You are listening to an event recorded at Houseman's Bookshop. For more recorded talks and forthcoming events, please visit Houseman's website.
So, How to Resist really does do what it says on tin, I think. It draws together lessons learned from both successful and unsuccessful campaigns. And Matthew has created this pocket-sized guide as a simple tool for making change happen. In his own words, the point of this book is that you can make change happen. Despite his success, I think it's safe to say that Matthew is unafraid of when it comes to pointing out both where he and his campaigns have been unsuccessful or failed and haven't been able to win or make the changes that they wanted. And from these experiences, he now gives us his reflections on what the remedy is. He is clear that power and understanding self-interest are key if we do want to make change. So our discussion today is going to delve into that and hopefully other issues too. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Matthew, who is Deputy Director of Citizens UK and lead organiser for London Citizens. He joined Citizens UK 11 years ago when it was 5 times smaller than it is today and employed just 4 staff. In his time, he led the Living Wage campaign and organised the 2016 London Mayoral Accountability Assembly, which was attended by 6,000 people. Pretty unprecedented figure in modern times. And he was also part of the Refugees Welcome and Safe Passage campaign, which secured entry to the UK for 1,100 vulnerable Syrian children. So I'd just like to start off by asking you if you can tell us a bit about what Citizens UK is, what this campaign that you've been deeply involved with is about. For those of us who haven't heard about it.
Sure. Can you hear me all right? So thanks for the introduction, thanks Houseman's for having me here, and thanks everybody for coming. I work with an organisation called Citizens UK, which has a 25-year history here in the UK, but a longer heritage in the States, where this method of community organising has been going for about 70 years. I mean, in some ways, bringing people together, building people power and making change is as old as the hills. But this particular way of working was born in Chicago in the 40s, and it was trying to use, I guess, a combination of some of kind of early civil rights tactics combined with trade union organising, but then applied to diverse urban contexts. So, right now in London, as an example, we try and bring together different communities, and in particular we look at organisations, so a school, a church, a community centre, a trade union branch, a student union. They're like little pockets of people power that we then try and train and politicise a bit more, bring together, find common concerns, and that's how we get our kind of power base. Basically, that's how we start trying to make change. So we run listening campaigns, we train teams of citizens to run listening campaigns. We don't start off saying we're all about wages or the environment or street safety or anything like that. We start off saying we're here to help people, be more effective, be more powerful as citizens on the things that they care about. So that's what Citizens UK is, and so we now operating in like London, Nottingham and Leeds and Sunderland and Wales, and as a model, it can definitely spread across the UK. And I guess we're best known for some of the campaigns like the Living Wage, but at the heart of it, our mission really is, as I say, it's about building the power of people and helping those voices that aren't heard to be heard in political life, not just to be heard, but to actually make an impact. So that's a little summary.
Yeah. I wonder also if you could just tell us, where does the organisation itself kind of draw inspiration for its models for change making?
Yeah. So it's worth talking about Saul Alinsky, that people probably have heard of. He was a sociologist initially, kind of gave up on academia to become a community organiser and a radical. And he wanted to cause trouble, and he wanted to help people on low incomes in poor neighbourhoods who were kind of powerless fight and win. And it was that legacy then kind of, I don't want to institutionalise is a funny word, but kind of turned into that kind of radical tactics of making change, turned into a way that you can actually build a kind of permanent people power organisation, and that was kind of Ed Chambers came after Saul Alinsky. This is kind of 50s, 60s US history here. And we then adopted it and put it into a British context in 1989, 1990. But we honour a UK history of social change. I mean, the first Citizens chapter area was East London, founded in York Hall in Bethnal Green in 1996. We had 1,000 people there from different communities in East London, and we really were looking back to the history of the Matchstick Girls strike in Bow and the Great Dock strike, and the combination of kind of trade union organising, but also the role of the Catholic Church and the Methodist Church in providing some of that real kind of radical. So we honour our kind of US history in terms of this model of organising, but we definitely honour a variety of histories, but including a kind of a UK and particularly I suppose East London, because that's where we started radical history.
I'd like to take maybe a step back and ask where you started. Could you maybe tell us a bit about your upbringing and education, and particularly what effect it has had on what you do now?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about this a little bit in the book, and like people's personal stories are a really important part of the way that we think organising works. People bringing themselves to it. Why you care about what you care about who you are. It's about relationships and stories of people. So I grew up in southeast London. I've already got a little bit of stick from the lovely North Londoner on the counter for that, who managed to get over North London bias and read the book beyond the intro. But yeah, I'm back in. I'm actually after a decade living in East London. I'm back in Peckham. So South Londoner is a part of who I am. And what is South London like? I grew up in Forest Hill, and I got a scholarship to a private school when I was 11, and then I went back to state school for sixth form, and so my personal story was like in and out of the big divide that we have in London. And so I have friends who they got bought a car, go to a private school, private tuition. All of that support is around them, and sometimes they cause trouble for themselves, but you just get picked up and put back on that path, and then I've got friends who were trying to do their homework, while looking after their baby sister, dodging gangs in the stairwell, while the gas meter ran out on the, in a high-rise block, and that for me was just a fundamental part of becoming politicised, because I didn't necessarily think about it then, but looking back on it now, like we tell, as a society, we tell kids that it's how clever you are and how hard you work, and that is a lie, and in my experience that is a lie. I know that is, of course you get people who succeed from all walks of life, and that's amazing, and isn't that a wonderful thing, but it's a lie to pretend that it is just down to that 13, 14, 15-year-old kid. So that really made me angry, and I've obviously kind of processed it now. You don't think about it like that when you're 13, 14. You're just a kid too. But that kind of drives me in this work, and thinking of the living wage campaign, when I think of what that means for people, I know that means that parents can have a bit more time to spend with their kids, and help them learn and help them be loved. And so that's a big part of kind of my upbringing.
I think it's interesting that it's a motivation for you to be able to speak from at least access to both sides of this divide, as you put it. And you do talk about what motivates people as being something quite important in the book, and the things that we care deeply about or shape our abilities to act. And you highlight that if we want kind of change, we have to be interested in getting to know people on that level. getting to know the people that we could work with on that level. So how do you do that in your campaigning? What does it mean to get to know people's interests?
Well, so whenever we would hold a meeting, like this is a meeting in a way, isn't it? It's got slightly different one, 2 microphones at the front and stuff, but we get people talking. So whenever we would start a meeting, we'd have something we call like a round. So it's basically just introductions, but rather than maybe where someone just says their name, we'd ask a question. Say the meeting was about a campaign to try and help young people access good job opportunities. We might do a round where people say, what was that first chance at a job that you got, and who helped you get that? And so we're just always trying to build in people talking about people that were important to them, parts of their story, moments in their life that are, I guess, it's that combination of like personal and political that I think is really powerful. And trying to, in some cases, people are, I guess, ashamed of what's going on in their personal lives. So if someone's in debt, and they think that's their fault, and they want to talk about it, they don't want to tell other people about it. But actually, if you look at the system, why are people in debt? Well, people are in debt because inflation's rising higher than earnings, and people are in debt because some of the ways that you can borrow money are really exploitative. You think about payday lenders, you can get trapped in cycles of debt. Now, people have kind of turned that part of their life into a private matter of shame. And how can we find a way for that to come out as what it really is, which is a political question as well. So and it doesn't have to just be about people who are like facing some immediate really difficult thing in their life. It's actually about all of us, like where do we get our values from, what drives us, our parents or books we've read or things we've learned. Like, why is it that people care about the world being a better place, or what they did care about, what do they care about? And so we really prioritise, good questions in groups, one-to-one conversations where you can really sort of talk that through, because that's all we've really got, like people power. That's all we've really got. Like, we've got our relationships to each other, and we've got the motivation we want to do things. We haven't got all the money and status and other kinds of power to move things. So that's why we really put people's stories and their motivations at the heart of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time we're interested in packing out rooms. We're interested in packing out rooms like this. We're also interested in kind of speaking to people on social media, like in kind of one-to-many ways of speaking. Why do you, because you go into quite a lot of depth around one-to-one conversations in the book. What's so critical about that, and how do we have those conversations?
So we talk a bit, I don't really go into this distinction too much, but like the difference between, I suppose, mobilising and organising. So a lot of the maybe big demonstrations, or even just like local meetings, I'm sure people have been to local meetings where people are angry, and maybe there's a councillor there or the police are there or something, and people come and they're angry for good reason usually, but it's for their own reason, and they've heard about it on a poster or maybe some social media, and it can be quite chaotic. Like, people want to shout their particular issue at the person, and we would think of that. Or in a big demonstration, maybe there's 101 reasons why people are there. They've all got their banners, and people have come for different reasons, and that's all. It's all good, but we would call that a kind of mobilised turnout. Whereas the organised turnout, which is really around the kind of relationships, is people have done the work of working out what they've got in common first. So if we're, think of a hustings type event, before an election, and what we would want to do is say, rather than just have the politician come and there's just all of our individual concerns, it's like, let's us get together and work out, that a humane treatment for refugees is important, or whichever the thing is that we can agree on, and then that's an organised turnout. And we trust each other that, like, we're going to ask a couple of questions, we want a yes or no answer, and they can't dodge it because that's what we're here for. And they can't, this question and then that question. It's not really an interaction of power to power.
Yeah.
It's an interaction of a politician to a kind of group of individuals. So we think the organised turnout is really important, and that relies on kind of trust, and it relies on relationships beforehand to figure out what we're going to do when we're in the room.
Yeah, I think it's like really key that actually we hold these two things in like at the same time, and we don't often get taught at least those organising skills of having a conversation with one person and engaging and getting to know that person. So that was definitely something I was glad you highlighted in the book. But you mentioned at the end there, power, this word, and it's the second chapter. It's really central to the book. And yeah, what is power for you, and who has it, and why is it important?
So I mean, for me, it's the fundamental thing, and it's people have their values, and people have their political aims and goals and beliefs, but all of that really, it comes down to power and who's making the decisions and how powerful are we. And I really learnt that in this fundamental experience, which I do talk about in the book, which was kind of the first campaign experience I had. And I went into this, it was a living wage campaign. It was working with low paid, mainly women workers at Queen Mary University, and you get under the skin. You just think it's like a normal bit. Some people do cleaning, some people do security, some people do teaching, and we kind of imagine it's all just like a happy place. People have their roles and stuff. And you start talking to people and you see how power operates, and you see how people who are at the bottom of the hierarchy of money and decision making and everything like that, they just, not always, but they can get exploited. And I couldn't quite believe what that was actually like. But people being bullied, people being discriminated against, people being threatened, people being not paid their holiday pay, not paid their sick pay. Like this I couldn't believe it. Racism, and they just didn't have the power to do anything about it. And no matter how great the idea, lots of well-meaning people, lots of well-meaning people in the university wouldn't like that to be the case, but they didn't know about it, and they turned a blind eye to it. And so and that's the bad bit of power, isn't it? And that's the bit of power where you see powerlessness, and you see power being abused. And like, in a way, when we think about power, often we don't like the word. It's like we think the association is, that means control, or that means, but then you think about the great examples of social change, and for me, the personal experience of organising with these low-paid workers, organising with students and academics and community, and we won. And like, you see the power on the flip side. You see the power when it's people power, when it's turning the situation around, when it's kicking out the racist manager, when it's winning a living wage and pension for these people, and that's power too. So the power is not a bad thing. The power is just what you need to build, and I think that so often people who are like they've got strong beliefs, they want to think of themselves as a good person who has strong values and principles. We can kind of, I don't know, not want to be associated with power. It's a dirty word, or and actually we need to use and build power, because otherwise we're just talking to each other about what we care about. And so that was a real challenge to me, and coming to we run training courses all the time, and you're trying to get a group of people who, students and teachers and people from churches and stuff, and you're trying to say, so are you hungry for power? And everyone's like, no, of course we're not hungry for power, you must be crazy. But you're trying to win the argument that people with strong values need to take power seriously, because that's how you get things done.
Okay. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. What do you say to that?
Yeah, always. That's one of the things that gets said back. Yeah, I mean, the powerlessness corrupts is the first thing. You know, people who have become like cynical, apathetic, ill, depressed, angry, like in a rageful way. You know, I think that is often comes from powerlessness. So, yeah, powerlessness corrupts too. But then for those into the kind of history of it, that quote actually has a different context than the one that's often like thought of. So the quote, people have heard of the quote. It was actually a letter this guy was sending. So Lord Acton was sending a letter to the Vatican, because the Vatican then was trying to instill this papal law doctrine, about papal infallibility. So like the Pope can do no wrong because he is the Pope, and that's what they were trying to instill. And so it's the ultimate unaccountable. You know, it doesn't matter what you say or anything else. Like, because he's the Pope, it's the right thing. And so Lord Acton was saying absolute power corrupts absolutely, because he was trying to make the argument that this is a bad change. Do not change papal law like this, because everyone needs to be accountable, and power needs to be in a relationship of accountability to people. So yeah.
Okay. So I want to get into a bit how you put this into practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you've spoken a little bit about a living wage campaign when you started out with Citizens UK, but could you tell us about a campaign you've been involved in, and tell us about its successes and its failures, and what you learned from
There's so many. So like Leeds Citizens right now is operating, and they did their listening campaign. This story that really struck people was a guy called Adrian Strain. He's a father. His son had a mental health problem and was diagnosed. Went to the GP, got a referral, but then missed it because he was just not well, and then was kind of like dropped. Then he had to go back to the GP, and then was just a bit confused about where he'd been signposted to. Anyway, to cut the story short, it was 18 months from that first diagnosis, and he still hadn't seen a specialist, and he took his own life. And that story Adrian shared as part of the listening campaign, and that it really moved people. And that was an extreme case, but people, once you start talking about it, people are like, well, I know someone who's struggled to access that kind of service and so on. So we came up with this idea, this solution, which was these things called like a navigator. So if you go to the GP practice and you get a referral, then someone, doesn't have to be a doctor, but someone who knows the system would take a bit of responsibility to help you actually get to that person who help you get to that specialist, basically. And so the listening, the kind of story, then sharing that story around, building up some of the power, building up some of the energy around it. You got to have there's the critique, but you've also got to have the constructive alternative. So we spoke to a few experts. We tried to figure out what we could do. This navigator idea came out of that. So you've got a kind of listening campaign in the community. You've got a powerful story, some help from experts, and then the action. So we tried to just sort of suggest this, and the clinical commissioning group, that's like where the money comes from in health, the commissioners didn't really respond. So we started off, we marched, they're supposed to be accountable to local people, priority set by local people, so we marched 100 people to the clinical commissioning board meeting, and they treated us like we were kind of invading army or something, and they had to block the doors, and we obviously just gave them biscuits and stuff like that, and we said that we're here with a proposal for health service delivery adjustment, and that we felt like we were doing really well actually, and you could see some of the doctors, some of the clinicians in the thing were like, yeah, I mean, this is, first of all, when have 100 people ever gone to these board meetings? Happen all the time where budgets get set and money gets spent. No one goes. You know, in the day, you can go in a day for 2 hours to this thing, and 100 people going is like a big deal. But the campaign wasn't easy, so I mean, it took about, the problem for us was that we then entered this long discussion, detailed discussion with the officers, you know, when you get into that level of how would it work and what kind of grade would they be and all of that detail. But you have to do some of that, but then the kind of energy was lost, and I wish that we'd have just done a little bit more to keep, you know, we needed some events, we needed some practical stuff people could do, we needed to keep the energy going in the campaign because only a few people can be in those detailed negotiations. Anyway, it took us probably about 12 months, to negotiate for. We did a couple more big actions with the CCG, found the right doctors who could really, you know, had the power to make it happen. And we now have, you know, Leeds now has across 2 big areas these navigators in place, and it was like probably £250,000 investment. But yeah, so there's always different lessons from the campaigns, but I suppose that one of the lessons from that was the power of the personal story to really get people talking about it and stir it up, but the importance of not getting lost in the long negotiations about detail and keeping your people power going. But there's lots and lots.
Yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned there that's maybe kind of seen as quite small, but is actually really important, is how do you take 2 hours out of your day to go to this board meeting? Where do you find the time, or where do people find the time?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, people go to a lot of meetings that don't go anywhere. So, you know, there is some time, and if you're part of a committee or a group or something which is supposed to be about social change, but if you think about it, has anything much changed, then, you know, it is about prioritising time, and trying to find stuff that works and stuff that motivates you and everything. But and also, like, what are those things that people are giving time to that could be a bit more radical? So we did a piece of work around this End Hunger Fast campaign, because of all the time that goes into food banks, for example. So like thousands of volunteers give tens of thousands of hours to food banks, which is good because people are hungry and they need the food. But, you know, one of the ways that we work is thinking, well, what is it that people are doing that with a little bit of a nudge could be a more radical, you know, so are people going to the food bank because they don't get paid a living wage? Are people going to the food bank because they want a 0 hours contract or because of benefit sanctions? So how can we change the things that are happening to a more political, radical edge, and unlock some of that time, unlock some of that energy towards a campaign, as well as, you know, a good service for people who need food.
Okay, so I think Jeremy Corbyn wrapped up the Labour Party conference today, or maybe it's still going, I'm not sure. Conservative Party conference is coming up. How important is it to work within organisations? Can we go it alone, or do we need to join a party or some other institution?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the go it alone thing, I don't think is that's definitely not the ethos of the book. Going it alone doesn't make much sense to me in terms of social change because of the power thing, like, you know, because we've got people power, and that usually means more than one person. I mean, we're a non-partisan, you know, we're a charity, so like we have to adhere to charity law. We can't be, as an organisation, we can't support one party or the other in terms of party politics like that. And one of the things that, you know, I'm most proud of in a way is that through a Conservative Mayor of London in Boris Johnson and a Conservative government, we've managed to win the living wage campaign. You know, for tens of thousands of people, persuade them to, it's not a real living wage, the government's living wage, it's less than the real living wage, but like it's still a big 10% pay rise that people on the minimum wage were getting, and that's because of the living wage campaign. So there's a big advantage to having a non-partisan, organisation like this. But then, party politics is where the power is. So I mean, people should join the political party and get involved. People should join campaign groups and get involved. It's definitely about being part of something, and yeah, I mean, an overall question of so we do a lot of work with education institutes, schools, and faith institutions and trade unions, and we think that part of what we're trying to do is increase the kind of radical political side of those organisations, and so I was in a school today, for example, down in Walworth, and schools can get they're just very busy being a school, and the government's throwing more and more at them in terms of the competition and the SATs and the exams, and just being a successful school is really hard. But actually, you speak to the teachers and you speak to the TAs and you speak to the parents, and of course the issues facing the kids in the school, they can't be ignored. So we're really trying to push schools to think about what's the effect of poor housing on children's learning, and what can the school do about that at a kind of policy level as well. How can the school campaign for more affordable housing, or for to tackle road landlords, because that's all relevant to the school being a school. Yeah.
I can't remember exactly who you were quoting in the book, but you speak about this kind of like holy and unholy alliance of bishops, business, and Boris.
Yeah.
How do you choose who you'll work with?
Bishops, business, and Boris. Yeah, this was the three Bs that we think helped make it impossible for David Cameron and George Osborne to just carry on ignoring the living wage campaign, and the bishops part is the kind of like I was just saying. I mean, at its best, the Church of England has made some really, I mean, through history, but also recently around refugees, around debt and payday lenders, around the living wage, and there is a powerful kind of moral voice there. Business, compared to the living wage campaign in the US, which is very much like a communities and unions versus business, straight down. I mean, that's how it folds down. And Democrat and Republic, it's very oppositional, the living wage campaign in the US. And what we've managed to do here, by sort of putting businesses that have paid the living wage into the front of the campaign, so they can be celebrated, they can be recognised, they get a badge, they can talk about why it's good for them and good for their reputation and so on. So the bishops, the business, and then Boris, because this is back in 2010, 9, 10, he's vying for David Cameron's job, and what he says is on the front page of the Telegraph. And so that combination, which you wouldn't necessarily associate with the living wage campaign, bishops, business, and Boris, was the unusual alliance. I'm not sure I called it an unholy alliance.
No, you didn't.
I didn't. An unusual alliance that made it impossible to ignore at that stage. And we were fighting a campaign and not winning for care workers, social care workers, to get a living wage. And that's really personal to me. I saw my grandmother and grandfather be cared for by young mainly women on the minimum wage, 0 hours contracts, and they were looking after my grandparents. And how can we get to that point where people doing that kind of work are treated amongst the worst of any group of workers in the UK? But we weren't winning the living wage campaign for care workers because there's just not money in the system for that. And that move by George Osborne to basically kind of take the name and call it the national living wage, but make that increase to the national minimum wage, has given 700,000 care workers a 10% pay rise 2 years in a row. And we weren't going to win that with our kind of employer to employer campaign. So yeah, the unusual alliance. So it's definitely a kind of campaign tactic that can be applied to all different sorts of issues. The usual suspects are too easily kind of pigeonholed. Like, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? So, who are those kind of unusual allies?
Okay, so my last question, but I'm sure there could be more. What one piece of advice does someone looking to change things need to take away with them this evening or from reading your book?
Well, the obvious one will be about power, because that is the beginning, if you like. If you want change, you need power. So that's definitely the beginning of the argument about how to think about it and start it. But the other one, just like simple things that you can remember, are like the action is in the reaction, is such a brilliant bit of advice, and so easy to keep forgetting even if you have been thinking about it. So the action is in the reaction is a Saul Alinsky quote, really, and it's basically saying that it's so easy to get focused on, like, we're doing this demonstration or we're doing this event because it's the right thing to do, or just because that's, or can we get the people, can we get the banners, you just get all focused on the action, the thing that we're going to do. But the action is in the reaction basically pushes you to be like, yeah, but what reaction are you going to get? Are you designing your demonstration or your protest or your event or your launch or whatever it is? Are you designing it in terms of like, this is how we're going to move them? Or are you just caught up in the event itself? And there's and just to commend a film and a story, which again I mentioned in the book, Selma, which is the story of the Selma marches and that part of the civil rights of Martin Luther King story and struggle is just, and if you watch that film with the action is in the reaction in your mind, because they choose to start their campaign in a place where they're pretty sure that the reaction from the local sheriff will be aggressive. So they're taking that brave, hard decision to have civil disobedience in a place where they think that's going to prompt a violent reaction. That they will then use the violent reaction to stir up more support for their movement and their campaign and their march, and it's just amazing to watch the film with that as your frame, and you see the action and a reaction and the action and a reaction building up until they win. And they would never have won without using the overreaction of the police and the racist state. They would never have built up enough power to win without using the overreaction of the enemy, basically. So yeah, action is in the reaction is a great one.